and I'm recording on live. I'm on TikTok live as I'm saying this. I'm going to update the background on TikTok live and then switch back over to my MacBook. This is a drawing of two Muppets engaging in the experience of Boonhunk. And I feel like that's pretty interesting. That's AI. I don't know if people are going to be upset by that, but I don't have a problem with it personally. I find the idea of using communication technologies pretty fascinating personally. So filtered routes, if the route intent doesn't include welcome, and I'm in the main navigation.tsx file, I'm looking at the intrinsic routes object and wondering about adding goals as an intrinsic route. I'm not quite sure where I would want to. Root, home, about, contact, courses, tutorials, contact, play, probably articles, contact, play, contact, demos, contact, resume, home, about, courses, articles, demos, contact, resume, recipes, tutorials, home, about, courses, tutorials, articles, contact, articles, recipes, services, contact, demos, resume, play, shop and tips, demos, contact, resume, demo, shop, play, tips. That seems like a pretty reasonable set of routes. Home, about, courses, tutorials, goals, main goals route. So I'm defining these routes in TypeScript, and when there's a variable that doesn't exist, then I can create that variable. It doesn't need to exist in the ways that I expect it to. And I'm going to look at the other routes and see, okay, const main on route. That's an interesting one. So I noticed that unused variable, and I created it. And this doesn't have a definition, which I appreciate. I'm going to change the let to a const, and then go over up here, main on route, main tips route, const main tips route, app route equals, I don't know if this TypeScript is actually idiomatic. At some point in the future, I know that I'm going to want to maintain this differently. And it would probably make a lot of sense to have some sort of, what am I saying? I know that I'm going to want to maintain this differently, and it would probably make sense to maintain the Git history so I can understand where I am context-wise. Scene goals, scene double underscore goals. I do the double underscore just because it's easy to recognize that pattern in the style sheets and just across the sites. href is going to be /goals. So this is what's used in links. Title is going to be goals. This feels kind of redundant, and ChatGPT could probably generate these routes. But I don't mind doing the bare minimum in terms of maintaining this set of abilities. Because I can use ChatGPT for anything. It's just, how do I have that relationship? So one of the spaces that I'm considering is onboarding people into all of these spaces, into all of this ecosystem. I want to make sure that I'm giving them tasks that are reasonable with their abilities, while understanding that everybody's going to have motivation more towards their holistic well-being and also career. So while I'm giving people access to these tools and services and describing my relationship to the space and building them out slowly and gradually, I do want to make it possible for other people to recognize their own capacity to make something similar. That's an interesting one. Maybe not on this live. Thanks for coming by. You're welcome to stay for a while. If you want to engage, then I might. Somebody asked me to say a message on TikTok, and I don't know them. So I'm going to get back to doing the stuff that I've been doing. Main goals route. So that route is defined, and it doesn't have any intent yet. So I'm going to say that the intent of this route, let's see, welcome is the only one that's available. Welcome, or what's the point of goals, community? Welcome or community are going to be the two focal points of the app for now. I'm going to say community is the point of this one. We go back over to main navigation, and the filtered routes are going to be includes. Is there a way to have that be a regex? Is there a way to turn that into a regular expression? So one of the options that I have here is to spend a lot of time thinking about how to make this optimal. Does the intent of this route include welcome or community? And so I'm just going to do an or loop, or an or operator. Duplicate that. Welcome. Splashy home about goals and contact. So there's the sidebar, which has more routes than the main header. And the reason is that I'm including the navigation list, the main navigation. Hey, wait a minute. Am I doing something weird with this? Yeah, actually. The nav with the ID of main nav Wait, what is this? Let me see. What am I doing with the other ones? Intrinsic routes. I'm looking for where I'm using this. And I find I'm going to ignore where it's imported. Resume href. So the timeline, 2017. I remember that I need to change the casing here. So this is one of the cool things about being a solo developer, is that that has nothing to do with my the pull request that I would otherwise change. And if I were to include that in a comment on a team, it would be probably confusing. But that was annoying me, so I just changed it. Okay, let's see. I'm going to replace this with a function where I look at the app route, and I'm going to extract this as for So I'm curious about doing an array contains. One of the options is for me to loop over the route intent and then compare it to a subarray. And I might actually just do that. So filter for is going to be filter for community. Welcome. And then okay, filter for, and then we take an array of intents. And we, for each route, we actually, I'm not going to do route.intent for empty array. Wait, what am I doing here? I forgot how to do this. For So for each intent of the route, if the intent, what am I saying? If the allowed intents includes the route intent, if the allowed intents that we're filtering for of the route includes the route intent that we're currently on in that loop, return true, otherwise return false. I don't know if this works. So I'm going to export that. Go down here. This is the reason that I love TypeScript, is you know where things are and what they're supposed to be doing. And on a team, it's just so much more difficult. I'm actually going to move this. Instead of that being there, I'm going to say app route, same place, function, filter, get route filter. There's probably a better way to name that, and this is a great use for ChatGPT because I don't want to think about it. And there's probably a better way to range this, and I also don't want to think about it. And I know that I can. There are opportunities for me to spend a lot of time reflecting on the quality of this loop or the understandability of it, and I can leave a comment where it's like, select routes, return a Boolean filter based on a set of intents. Get route filter sync. Return a Boolean filter based on a set of intents. And there are probably better ways to describe that. I'm going to say foci. Is an array of app focal points. If foci includes route intent, return true, otherwise return false. Cool, that feels reasonable. I don't know how long it took to make that loop. I try to do it thoughtfully more than anything. So what is this issue? That doesn't exist. Those aren't necessary. Logo component remains the same. So this is from a time when I plugged this into ChatGPT and asked it to refactor, and it left a whole bunch of comments that are not very useful. They aren't very useful. Some of them are, like handle responsiveness on the client side is useful. But ChatGPT, when you're coding with something like one of these language models, it is not going to maintain the same context as where you're putting the code. Just fundamentally, that's just the way that it's going to work. Always. Which is why a lot of the people there's a lot of flux professionally about which jobs are going to exist, for example. A lot of flux industrially about who is encouraged systemically. I don't love that necessarily. Not even necessarily. I don't love the amount of flux that goes into people wondering about which jobs are going to exist. Especially when it feels kind of silly to me. Because, why does it feel silly? It feels silly because the reality of the job is so much more niche and specific than anyone could, like any one system would want to navigate. There are systems that are very complex, but those are maintained by a lot of people anyway. And so doing things very quickly or very slowly is just, it lacks context and the ability for us to create systems that can process information is like, which information are they processing and why? What is the goal of this system? Cool. So home, about, goals, and contact are on my website, and I'm going to deploy this because I don't mind. It's another cool thing about being a solo dev is that you can deploy your code whenever you want. You don't need to worry about whether it's going to break someone else's code. You kind of need to worry about whether it's going to break your own code, but not really. Cool. What's the next space to consider? Well, I'm going to try to start committing more meaningfully because I recognize that if my content is going to be for aspiring developers, it isn't very helpful if I only give them the abstract. Nobody needs to care about these commit messages. So 2024 10B, what did I do? Added a goals route. Did I? Yeah. I didn't actually add goals. So I can amend that commit message, git commit, amend, FGI. Cool. So that's a pretty standard chunk of work.